Okay, for this painting, we are going to work with the orange. So the color orange is the dominant color that we are seeing in the photo. So I'm going to paint this on. So since this is the dominant color, we are going to just create a full base of orange on the orange. And one thing I realized, I did not draw the stem of the orange, but that's not a big deal. We'll just paint that on. So that'll be one of the last things that I work on in the video. So as I'm applying the orange color as my base, I'm just wanting to make sure that I am curving my brush strokes and keeping that fairly consistent. And because the orange is like the last thing we're going to paint in this area, I'm having to cover up some things like the table. Some of the paint from the table got onto this. Some of the green invaded the space where I drew the orange originally, which isn't a big deal. The paint will cover it. But with orange, it is a thinner color, so it may just take a few coats in order to cover everything up. Now, one thing I want to get rid of is there's this kind of high ridge of orange, and that can dry to a different texture. I'm just going to wipe that away. And sometimes that can be a little cumbersome to work with or try and work around. All right, so I have my base of orange on the orange. And next thing, we're going to work with the shadow color. So because orange is our base, we want to mix that with its complement. So that would be blue. So just a little bit of blue, some orange. We're going to make up that dark value. So this will serve as our shadow color. Then I'm going to paint this at the bottom. And then I'm simply going to get orange paint and blend this into it. So right along the edge here. So the shadow on the bottom of the orange is dark, but it's not super, super dark. Like you can still kind of see an orange glow underneath the shadow. So I have a little bit of extra paint on my brush. I'm gonna wipe that off my brush. Okay, so no extra paint now. I'm gonna get a little bit more orange on my brush and try and blend in the remainder of this dark value. So orange can sometimes be a little tricky to blend, especially with darker colors. And that's mainly because it is a thinner paint. So you may just have to touch it up a little bit. So for example, today in class, I've had to go over the bottom shadow area a few times just to get it to where it was a little bit thicker looking and it wasn't as translucent. So you may have to do the same. So I'm going to add just a little bit more of the shadow color at the bottom. Try and blend this into the rest of the orange that I've been working with. So now what I'm doing, I'm just kind of letting up on the pressure that I'm placing on the paintbrush, and that does help blend some of these colors in. Work with a little more of the shadow. So the paint is starting to dry on me just a little bit, which is why when I'm starting to paint, it's kind of peeling, not peeling it up, but it's lifting up some of the paint. So I'm going to let this area dry, then I'll go back and touch it up. But in the meanwhile, I can work with my highlights. So I'm going to take orange and white. So we're just going to mix up kind of a lighter value. And we're going to start this at the top. We'll put down some of this color, then we get some orange, regular orange, to blend this in. So by doing this, this will also help me layer my paint because there are parts on this object that are still a little thin. So the brush strokes look really streaky and it isn't really where I want it yet. so I'm going to try and push this highlight a little bit brighter. It's not quite as bright as I'm wanting. So just going to start at the top again. All right. And then I'm going to put those dark values back in, or rather, excuse me, touch them up just a little bit. So I need to make just a little bit more because I ran out of paint and it dried on me. All right, so I almost have all this blended how I want. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix up a brighter highlight color. So in this case, we're working with yellow and white. So we're going to work in the highlights at the very top that are really bright. Let's try to finish up some of this. All right, so for these other highlights, I'm going to take a touch of a yellow and some white, make that highlight. And I'm just going to stipple this in a little bit. And I'm not going to worry too much about how perfect it is because I'm going to blend it in here in a second. So now I'm going to take a brush that has no paint on it. And I'm just going to use my stippling motion to go on top of this. So we're working with layering the paint right now. Then I'm going to get a little bit of this kind of lighter, brighter orange. And very lightly, I'm going to go through and stipple this. And so this is going to help recreate that orange peel texture. Let me get just a tiny, tiny amount of orange on my brush. Got a little too much. I'm scraping that off. Now I'm going to stipple that on. And I'm even going to do this on top of some of those dark areas. So this is going to be very similar in technique to what I did with the lemons. So both the lemon at the top and bottom. So I got a little too much paint maybe in some areas, so I just wiped off my brush. I'm now going to go back over these with a brush without the paint on it. So there's little traces of orange paint, but not too much. I'm still stippling some of that orange on a brush that doesn't have too much paint on it. I'm using a brush with very little paint to stipple. Now I need to build up some of those bright highlights again. So I'm going to go back to my bright yellow white mix with slight traces of orange in it. And we're going to go through and stipple this texture back on. So this is where we're working with this layering process. So it's going to be a little more dense in this area. And then I'm going to let it kind of fade and trail out just a little. So I'm just going to do this, and then I'm going to grab my brush that I was using a second ago. It was fairly dry. And go back over that. Now for the stem appears to be slightly green. So in that case, if I take a little bit of green paint and then just a touch of red, and then mix that. And so I'm going to paint this in the location where it is. So I'm holding my brush on the metal, so I have a lot more control over it. And I'm going to take just a touch of white, kind of mix that up a little, maybe a little more white. And I'm going to add that to the highlight area of the stem. little too much of the highlight color on, so I'm gonna go back in and put some of that dark value back on it. And then just underneath this, so this is another thing that I did not draw originally. It's kind of a yellowish orange color. So I'm just going to add a little bit of orange to this. And that should get me the color that I need. Maybe a little bit more yellow. And we're just going to paint that on. So this is all pretty small. So you'll probably want a fairly fine, sharp brush, or pointed brush at least. And I accidentally got a little bit on the stem, so I'm going to just put some of that dark value back there. And then there's kind of a little dark area underneath that yellow section. All right, so for the shadow, the table is that brownish orange color that we made in the very first video. So I'm going to create a shadow that's based in a little bit of orange, blue. So mix that up, a touch of purple. So that'll help darken the shadow even more. And then the shadow will help me cover up some of these little slips and errors too. So I can mix up a little more paint so I can put it on a smaller brush. So the shadow is really going to help give this orange a place on the table. So it looks like it's actually resting on top of it. And then based on what this looks like after it dries, I may need to touch it up because remember the paint has a tendency to dry lighter than how it appears when you first start painting. So I'll just have to kind of see where this goes. And I'm just going to add a little more dark value to the stem. And lastly, I'm just going to touch up a few things. So my orange is kind of misshapen over here. It's not quite the round shape that I'm wanting. Oops, had some of my highlight color on that. Just going to stipple to go over that. Keep getting a lighter color on my brush than I'm wanting, so I gotta keep fixing it. All right, so there's the orange. I still have kind of this indent in my orange I need to fix. It looks like it was dropped, but that's okay. I will slowly work with that and try and fix it. Part of the paper is curled too, so I think that's just making it look worse than it really is. That looks better. Half of this video is just going to be me trying to fix a mistake. All right, I'm going to let that dry, see how it looks, but that is how you approach the orange.